So much of inclusion is hindered by people competing with each other in unhealthy ways. It's like an ongoing status contest that slows everything down. I'm Dr. Jonathan. I work with organizations to make them inclusive, and I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready, because we're talking about how status contests undermine diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Status contests. What a waste of everyone's time. I've seen a lot of damage happen in organizations that would otherwise be on their way to inclusion because of these petty competitions. It's not always petty, but it is a competition. It's a status contest. And when I say status contests, I mean situations where groups compete for recognition within the organization. Too often, this comes at the expense of someone else within the organization. People scoring points, people getting ambushed, people laying traps. It's really quite unpleasant. In terms of diversity and inclusion, these status contests come in a variety of forms. We're going to talk about 3 examples to bring it to life. Let me know if any of these ring true. The first example is HR versus the Chief Diversity Officer. I'm going to do a whole separate show on this, but in my experience, when you start to make real progress around diversity inclusion in the workplace, this will often create a tension between the HR and the diversity function. Often this tension is crushed because diversity reports into HR. This is why people say HR should report into the CEO, to avoid that. I personally have had reports buried because they were inconvenient. I'm talking about work that I was paid to do, and it was ignored as the result of a status contest. Here's an anonymous real-life example. Years ago, I worked with an organization that you know, and I found evidence to show that the HR function itself was being weaponized against employees from a particular social identity group. People were being managed out of the company, put on disciplinary, having their work scrutinized. I also found evidence of an ethnic penalty, disparities in pay, promotion, and retention for people of color. Not anecdotes, not whispers, not rumors. I could prove it. This didn't go down well with HR. They felt that they were being blamed for discrimination. Now, can you understand how sensitive this is? The status contest occurred because HR didn't want to be undermined by the diversity function. HR often has a privilege that the inclusion team, the diversity team, doesn't. In this case, they were more established. They've got operational relationships with leaders. Don't get me wrong, HR gets a lot of hate, but in this organization, they were considered to be a necessary evil. Diversity, inclusion doesn't always have that privilege, and it's inconvenient for HR if they're characterized as being the bad ones. It's their privilege that's being undermined. Now, I'm not hating on HR. I'm just giving an example of a status contest. When DEI reports into HR always wins. This doesn't mean that the people win. The second example is ERG leaders versus leaders in the hierarchy. When I say ERG, I mean employee resource groups, staff networks, business resource groups. I don't mind what you call them, but specifically, I'm referring to voluntary groups of employees within an organization with shared values or shared social identity or shared interests. These aren't mutually exclusive. A community of the leading academics on this topic generally define employee resource groups in this way. I know because I'm part of that community. If you're interested in learning more, the first 50 episodes of this podcast are all about ERGs. Now, like most groups, ERGs, they need a leader or two, often called a co-chair. What is often overlooked is the power of an ERG leader, the power of a co-chair. This is a coveted job because if you're effective, charismatic, if you're useful, you can get access to the highest parts of the organization. A real issue is that even if you don't have any of those things, you can still get access to the highest parts of the organization. One of the downsides of ERGs is that people want to become the leaders to gain this access, to gain this status, without actually caring about the members. Here's the thing. Suppose you've got an ERG leader who isn't selfish, who is genuine, and they're great at the job. They can often find themselves in status contests with other leaders within the group. So here's another personal example. I remember a person who led an ERG. Now this person was an executive assistant in their day job, and they were good, and I mean really good at being an ERG leader. This person was a leader. ERGs can reveal that kind of talent. Problem is, they're a leader in the ERG, but not in the organization. Some of the members of the group are not leaders in the ERG, but they are leaders in the organization. In my example, this led to a status contest. Have you ever watched a police drama on TV? A crime is committed and it's a big crime. Local police officers are handling it, but the crime is so big that the FBI or the CIA, they need to get involved. Someone says, this is no longer your jurisdiction. Thanks for your help, but we've got the authority here now. That's a status contest. And it's kind of like that. In this case, the ERG leader had the authority, but the leaders in the organization, they used their power from outside of the group to assert their authority. Now, this isn't a perfect example, but you get the point. Someone feels that their power is undermined. The power outside of the group is used to exert a force within the group. In my experience, it's not always clear who wins, but once again, this doesn't mean that the people win. The third example I want to give is a little bit of a cheat. It's not in an organization, it's not in a workplace, it's on social media. I'm prolific on social media. I write every day on LinkedIn. I write every day on Twitter. I've started posting videos every day on TikTok. It's not me dancing or doing pranks. It's book reviews and there's loads of stuff coming. So make sure you check that out if you are interested. The point I'm making is that I use social media. It's logical. I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Social media makes it easier for me to hit that number. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, I disagree with so much of what the so-called experts say, so much of what the leaders say on social media. And that's not a surprise to you. As a regular member of our audience, you already know that. As a regular member of our audience, what you learn here means that there's a lot of stuff that you're free to ignore. This frees up room to focus on the things that are relevant for you. But some of these experts, they have a lot of status in the digital space. Maybe it's awards. Maybe it's being recognized on a list. Maybe it's a huge audience. Maybe they are successful leaders. They've got a lot of influence, but they're not always free to say what they want. In this case, the status contest is not with other people, it's with themselves. They don't want to lose status. Some people don't know any better, but for the ones that do, it's not easy to say what you really think. So it's easier to follow the mainstream. We've discussed this before. They speak in platitudes. The platitude problem of diversity and inclusion means they say things like, we all just need to be kind to each other. That's a platitude. That gets positioned as an insight. They speak in rhetoric. The rhetorical problem of diversity and inclusion means they make emotional appeals to grab your attention. This emotional appeal often plays on sympathy and guilt. These are short-term plays. Or they speak in fallacies. The fallacy problem of diversity and inclusion means they misrepresent the truth to make arguments that superficially make sense, but in reality don't stand up to scrutiny. The business case for diversity is established. Unconscious bias training is effective for building inclusion. These are fallacies that people think are real. People think these things are true. When someone on social media with high status says these things, the pantomime continues. They maintain their status because going against the mainstream narrative may be unpopular. I do my best so that I don't have this problem. This is why I don't get invited to panel events anymore. This is why I don't get invited to any events anymore. I don't hate events. I don't hate panel events. I do hate anything that wastes your time. Anyone who knows me knows that. They want to protect their status. They want to enhance their status. They avoid anything that will challenge that. This doesn't mean that the people win. These are 3 things that I've noticed that I want you to be aware of. In my experience, when reasonable dialogue turns into a status contest, typically it revolves around power and privilege. It happens when someone is rude to another person, someone's offended by another person's words or actions. Someone feels their power or privilege is being threatened. Someone's ego is threatened. This is a short list of things you should be aware of. There's a much longer list. I could do a whole show on this topic. If you want me to discuss that, do let me know. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? Status contests undermine diversity and inclusion in the workplace when 1. People feel their power is being undermined. 2. People feel their privilege is being undermined. And 3. People want to maintain their status. So what do you think? When was the last time you were pulled into a status contest? Get in touch or leave a message via the link in the show notes. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, then give us a 5-star review and a comment wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps other people like you to find the show. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.